London, 1938. The factories of the Midlands hummed with peacetime production. Norton, BSA, Triumph, Royal Enfield, names that built Britain's motorcycles, names that would soon build Britain's defense. The sound of engines echoed through the narrow streets, but something was changing. Something unprecedented. Women were riding motorcycles, not just riding, racing. At Brooklands Circuit in Surrey, the banking rose steep and unforgiving. The track surface rippled with concrete joints that could throw a rider in an instant. And there, pushing past 100 miles per hour, were women. Florence Blenkiron, Teresa Wallach, Beatrice Schilling. 3 names, 3 pioneers, 3 women who had helped change the course of a war. In 1934, Teresa Wallach and Florence Blenkiron had accomplished something no man or woman had done before. They rode a 600 cubic centimeter Panther motorcycle fitted with a sidecar and trailer from London to Cape Town, crossing the Sahara Desert without a compass. 13,500 miles through sandstorms and breakdowns, past nomads and wild animals, building tow hitches in the desert, rebuilding entire engines in remote African villages. Lady Astor, Britain's first female member of Parliament, sent them off with words that would prove prophetic. I am an unrepentant feminist and convinced that whatever a man can do, a woman can do too. But in 1938, as Germany annexed Austria and eyes turned nervously toward the continent, these racing accomplishments would take on new meaning. The Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens, had existed before. Formed in 1917 during the First World War, women served as telegraph operators, clerks, code experts, then disbanded in 1919. Now on the 9th of September 1938, just days before Prime Minister Chamberlain would fly to Munich, the Wrens were reformed. Dame Vera Lawton Matthews took command. She had served as a Wren in the First War, volunteering on the very day the service was created. She was educated, well-traveled, a mother of 3, and a natural leader. Meanwhile, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the ATS, was also formed in September 1938, the women's branch of the British Army. Initially recruiting women between 18 and 43 years old, veterans of the earlier war could join up to age 50. The first recruits served as cooks, bakers, clerks, storekeepers. But both organizations knew that if war came, they would need more. Much more. September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. Within months, the call went out. Join the Wrens and free a man for the fleet. By the end of 1939, 3,000 Wrens had answered. The roles expanded quickly. Radar operators, administrative staff, pilots, anti-aircraft crews, and dispatch riders. The Royal Navy needed reliable communication. Radio technology was advancing but remained vulnerable, susceptible to interference, prone to failure, and most critically, insecure. Dispatch riders on motorcycles provided a solution. Fast, mobile, difficult to intercept, carrying orders and intelligence in sealed leather message bags. But there was a problem. Every able-bodied man was needed at sea, or at the front lines, or in the air. The solution was unprecedented. Women would ride. The Wren's leadership turned to the racing circuits, to the women who had already proven themselves, who knew how to handle powerful motorcycles at high speed, who could maintain and repair their own machines. Florence Blenkiron, already famous for her African expedition, enlisted. Teresa Wallach joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. She would serve as both a dispatch rider and Britain's first female tank mechanic. Beatrice Schilling, an engineer and racer, would continue her technical work, inventing a crucial modification to the Merlin engines that powered Spitfire fighters, solving fuel pressure problems during combat maneuvers. But she also rode. The motorcycles were modest. BSA, Royal Enfield, Triumph, mostly in the 250 to 350 cubic centimeter range. Single-cylinder engines, not powerful by racing standards, but light, agile, perfect for narrow English lanes and bombed city streets. The training was rigorous. Not just riding, but mechanics, navigation, protocols, security. A dispatch rider had to check oil and tire pressure, change flats in the field, repair or replace chains, make roadside repairs under any conditions. They had to memorize routes, navigate without lights during blackout conditions, identify landmarks in darkness. They had to understand military hierarchy, security procedures, the absolute necessity of completing their mission. Joyce Priest was 20 years old in 1941 when she joined the ATS. She had never even driven a car, but she was accepted for training as a driver, starting on 3-ton lorries. When the opportunity came to volunteer for motorcycle dispatch rider training, she was, in her own words, thrilled to pieces. The training took place at military facilities across Britain. The women learned on the same motorcycles they would ride in service, the same bikes that would carry them through hell. Joyce and 4 other women, Bobby, Vera, Eileen, and Joan, became a team, assigned to the great military base and naval dockyards at Chatham and Kent. They shared a bedroom in a Victorian house, way up in the attic. They rode in leather jackets, riding breeches, knee-length leather boots, crash helmets. Joyce remembered the amusement. They were all slim in those days. With their hair tucked under helmets, they looked like men, but they still wore their makeup. By 1940, something remarkable had happened. All of the British Navy's dispatch riders were women, every single one. The men had gone to war, and the women had taken their place. April 22nd, 1941, Plymouth, Devonport. The signal tower atop Mount Wise glowed red. Warning: German bombers, Heinkel and Junkers aircraft were coming. Civilians huddled in brick bomb shelters. Searchlights swept the sky. Anti-aircraft guns tracked invisible targets above. Below, in the blackout gloom, dotted with fires and explosions, a single headlight cut through the darkness. Third Officer Pamela McGeorge of the Women's Royal Naval Service, 23 years old, former Sea Ranger, was carrying urgent dispatches to the naval shipyards at Devonport. The roar of her motorcycle engine competed with the thunder of bombs. Rubble littered the streets. Buildings burned. The city was being destroyed around her. Then a bomb fell close. The blast wave hit like a physical wall, throwing her from the motorcycle, metal and flesh tumbling across broken pavement. She picked herself up, bleeding, ears ringing. The motorcycle was a twisted wreck. Bent metal, broken glass, useless. She grabbed her message bag, turned, and ran. Half a mile to headquarters, with high explosive and incendiary bombs falling around her. Running through fire, through smoke, through hell, she delivered the message. And then, without hesitation, she volunteered to go back out. On September 30th, 1941, Third Officer Pamela McGeorge was awarded the British Empire Medal for bravery in carrying urgent dispatches on foot during an air raid. Her story was not unique. Across Britain, Wren dispatch riders were riding through the Blitz. London was burning, night after night. German bombers turned the city into an inferno. The Wrens worked 8-hour shifts, day and night, delivering messages between the Admiralty and embassies, between headquarters and bases scattered across the country. During the invasion of the Low Countries, the London-based Wrens worked tirelessly, riding through streets that were increasingly difficult to navigate. Buildings collapsed. Unexploded bombs lurked in craters. Fires blocked roads. But the messages had to get through. In the ATS, women like Joyce Priest and her team at Chatham faced similar dangers, riding in all weather, in darkness, through raids. Molly Davies, 19 years old, from the Welsh mining village of Garnant in Carmarthenshire, had a passion for motorsports. Her father, Handel, had been a mechanic who served on the Western Front, later becoming a race enthusiast and president of Swansea Motor Club. Molly joined the ATS and the 67th Welsh Searchlight Regiment, quickly qualifying as a dispatch rider, her handling skills learned from her family. She became the first ATS servicewoman to lose her life during the Second World War. Her family erected a 6-foot memorial sculpture at Christ Church in Garnet, listed as Grade to Me by Quadu, the Welsh Heritage Organization, in 1998. Recognized as an unusual sculptural depiction of a romanticized female in military uniform, a manner usually reserved for male military casualties. A rare physical illustration of the active role of women in 20th century warfare. The dangers were constant. Dispatch riders were prime targets. Enemy intelligence knew that eliminating them could cripple communication lines. They faced hostile weather, mechanical breakdowns, treacherous roads. They rode alone, often deep into military zones, carrying orders that could determine the outcome of battles. And they had to maintain their own machines. A breakdown in the middle of a mission meant performing roadside repairs, sometimes under fire, sometimes in freezing rain, sometimes in complete darkness. The mortality rate was sobering. Over the course of the war, more than 100 Wrens who served as dispatch riders lost their lives. 717 ATS members became casualties during World War II, but they kept riding. In the attic room at Chatham, Joyce and her team built something stronger than fear. Sisterhood. Eileen from Tottenham, Vera from Hull, Joan from Cornwall, Joyce from Woodford Green, and Bobby. 5 women sharing danger, sharing duty, sharing life. They learned each other's habits, Vera's methodical approach to maintenance, Joan's quick wit under pressure, Eileen's steady nerves. They covered for each other when illness struck, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm, when memories of close calls haunted the dark hours. Across Britain, in Wren and ATS units, this sisterhood repeated itself. Women who had come from different backgrounds, different regions, different social classes, united by service, by motorcycles, by the shared knowledge that any mission could be their last. The work was relentless. Routes to memorize, Chatham to Dover, London to Portsmouth, Bristol to Cardiff. Hundreds of miles, thousands of deliveries. Navigation without lights during blackout. Memorizing landmarks that might not exist tomorrow. Identifying roads by feel and memory. Weather was no excuse. Rain turned roads to rivers. Fog reduced visibility to nothing. Ice made every turn treacherous. But the messages had to get through. Intelligence reports from Bletchley Park, the code-breaking center that was slowly unraveling German communications. Initially dispatches from Y stations, the listening posts scattered across Britain, rode on the backs of these women. Later, the system switched to teleprinter transmission, but for months, the war's most secret intelligence traveled by motorcycle. Orders to naval bases, directing ship movements, coordinating convoy protection, battle plans, troop movements, supply schedules, and humor somehow survived. Joyce remembered riding into Chatham. Sailors lined up beside her bike, nudging each other. Go on, you ask. No, you ask. None brave enough to approach the helmeted figure they assumed was male. Until she removed her helmet, and their faces registered surprise. Another time she rode into a barracks, nearly bumping into a blonde officer who scowled and walked past. The regimental sergeant major bawled at her, "What's the matter with you, soldier? Don't you salute an officer when you see one?" She was shocked, blushing, dropped her package and fled to her bike, hearing roars of laughter from the office. A sergeant came out apologizing. The RSM had made a mistake. he thought she was male. Joyce was still angry, told him to inform the RSM, "Yes, I do salute officers, but only ATS officers." Because until July 1941, ATS members were volunteers, required to salute only their own officers. It wasn't until they received full military status that year that they fell under the complete military hierarchy. These moments of humanity, of humor, of defiance sustained them through the darkness. By 1943, the Wrens numbered nearly 75,000 women, performing more than 200 different roles. The ATS grew even larger, reaching 190,000 members by the end of the war. Women serving with anti-aircraft units, as radar operators, as military police, as mechanics, as drivers, as clerks, as anything the military needed. But the dispatch riders remained special. Visible, independent, riding through cities and countryside, symbols of women's capability, of women's courage. Lord Brabazon of Tara, speaking in Parliament on July 6, 1943, praised them. We who live in London see many members of the WRNS going about on motor bicycles in all sorts of weather. We see them on the streets of London every day. Figuratively, whenever I see one, I take my hat off to her. The recognition was partial, incomplete, but it was there. These women were noticed. The war was turning. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, was being planned. The largest amphibious assault in history, requiring coordination on an unprecedented scale and requiring communication. Secure, reliable, fast communication. At some point in early June, the orders for D-Day were tucked into leather messenger bags. Wren dispatch riders fired up their motorcycles and headed out to deliver those historic messages. We don't know all their names. We don't know all their routes. But we know they rode through England to bases and embassies, to command posts and naval yards, carrying the plans that would liberate Europe. Joan Burns, a Wren dispatch rider based in Swansea, later received new orders. She took orders out to the D-Day invasion fleet in her launch. The invasion succeeded. Through summer and autumn of 1944, Allied forces pushed across France into the Low Countries toward Germany. The dispatch riders continued their work. Though the intensity of the Blitz had passed, the dangers remained. Weather, mechanical failure, exhaustion, accidents on roads damaged by years of war. By 1945, the end was in sight. The ATS had grown to 250,000 members. The Wrens maintained their strength near 75,000. Dispatch riders, having served through the darkest days, continued riding through the final months. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The women who had ridden through fire, who had carried the messages that helped win the war, began the transition to peace. For some, the adjustment was difficult. Teresa Wallach, who had served 7 years in active service as dispatch rider and tank mechanic, found post-war Britain economically depressed, horizons narrowing, opportunities limited. She emigrated to the United States in 1947, eventually settling in Chicago, where she opened a motorcycle dealership, later founding the Easy Riding Academy, teaching safety and skill to a new generation. She remained active in motorcycling until age 88, when failing eyesight finally forced her to stop. She died on April 30th, 1999, her 90th birthday. Joyce Priest returned to civilian life, married, raised a family, but never forgot her service, never forgot the sisterhood, never forgot the feeling of a throttle under her hand and an urgent message in her bag. Many dispatch riders returned to traditional roles. The war had opened doors, but society's expectations remained largely unchanged. Yet something had shifted, something permanent. The WRN, unlike after the First World War, was not disbanded. It continued, absorbing more roles, taking on new responsibilities until 1993, when it was formally integrated into the Royal Navy. The ATS merged into the Women's Royal Army Corps in 1949, a permanent unit for women serving in the British Army. The precedent was set. Women had proven they could serve not just in support roles, but in dangerous, critical, demanding positions. The arguments against women's capability had been answered, not with words, but with service. Today, few people remember the flying wrens. The dispatch riders who rode through the Blitz have mostly passed into history. Their photographs remain archived at the Imperial War Museums, at the National Army Museum, in private collections. Images of young women in leather jackets and crash helmets standing beside their Royal Enfields and Triumphs and BSAs. Faces calm, determined, unremarkable in their remarkable courage. The memorial to Molly Davies still stands at Christ Church in Garnet, a 6-foot sculpture of a young woman in military uniform, listed Grade 2, maintained by KDW. A reminder in stone of service and sacrifice. The portrait of Pamela McGeorge, painted by Anthony Devis, hangs in the Hepworth Wakefield Art Museum, a formal recognition of heroism. But mostly these women are forgotten, not deliberately, not maliciously, simply overlooked in the larger narrative of the war. The story of World War II focuses, understandably, on the great battles, on the leaders and generals, on the turning points and decisive moments. The story of women in World War II often centers on the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, on the land army girls, on the factory workers, on the nurses, all deserving of recognition, all crucial to victory. But the dispatch riders, riding alone through darkness and danger, carrying the messages that made coordination possible, fade into the margins. Perhaps because their work was scattered, individual, not concentrated in one place or one dramatic moment. Perhaps because motorcycling remained and remains seen as masculine, making their achievement harder to categorize. Perhaps because they survived, most of them, without the tragic drama that makes for memorable narrative. Whatever the reason, their story deserves remembering. By 1940, all of the British Navy's dispatch riders were women. All of them. This was not a token gesture, not a publicity stunt, not a minor contribution. This was the complete transfer of a critical military function from men to women. At the peak of the war, when communication meant survival, when every message could determine the outcome of battles, when the defense of Britain hung in the balance, women rode. More than 100 Wrens lost their lives. 717 ATS members became casualties. These were not accidents in training, not unfortunate incidents in safe zones. These were deaths in service, in combat conditions, under enemy fire. The motorcycles they rode were British-made products of an industrial base that would have been familiar to their grandfathers. Simple, reliable, maintainable. But in the hands of skilled riders, these modest machines became instruments of war, carrying intelligence from Bletchley Park, carrying orders for D-Day, carrying the coordination that made modern warfare possible. The legacy extends beyond the war itself. Teresa Wallach's Easy Riding Academy in Phoenix taught thousands of riders, emphasizing safety, skill, responsibility. She helped found the Women's International Motorcycle Association, became its first vice president, was inaugurated into the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame in 2003. Her book, The Rugged Road, chronicling the London to Cape Town journey with Florence Blenkerin, was finally published in 2001, 2 years after her death. Joyce Priest's memoir, archived by the BBC's WWII People's War Project, preserves the human details, the humor and fear and camaraderie that official histories often miss. The photographs carefully preserved in museums and archives show us faces, young faces, serious faces, faces that look back at us across 80 years with a steady gaze. They were not superhuman, not exceptional in the sense of possessing abilities beyond normal people. They were exceptional in what they chose to do, in how they responded when called, in their willingness to serve despite danger. 19-year-old Molly Davies joining the ATS with skills learned from her mechanic father. 20-year-old Joyce Priest, who had never driven a car but volunteered to ride motorcycles. 23-year-old Pamela McGeorge running half a mile through falling bombs to deliver her message, then volunteering to go back out. Florence Blenkren, Teresa Wallach, Beatrice Schilling, bringing racing skills and engineering knowledge to military service. Thousands of others, names unrecorded, faces unphotographed, stories untold, all of them riders. The motorcycles are mostly gone, scrapped after the war, recycled into the post-war rebuilding. A few survive in museums, carefully maintained, preserved as historical artifacts. But they're silent now. Cold metal, museum pieces. They no longer carry the urgent weight of military dispatches, no longer thunder through blacked out streets, no longer represent the lifeline of communication that bound Britain's defense together. Yet in their silence, they testify to capability, to courage, to service, to women who rode when their country called. The story of the female dispatch riders of World War II is not ultimately about motorcycles. It is not about technology or tactics or military organization. It is about people, about choice, about what individuals do when history demands more than ordinary life requires. In 1938, women in Britain faced limited opportunities, social expectations that defined acceptable roles, assumptions about capability and courage. By 1940, those assumptions were being tested, not in theory, not in debate, but in practice. Women took on roles previously reserved for men, not because of ideology, not because of politics, but because the nation needed them. And they succeeded. The dispatch riders rode through conditions that tested the most experienced riders, through darkness and weather and danger, carrying messages that helped win the war. More than 100 died in service. Hundreds more were injured, traumatized, marked by experiences that would stay with them for life. They didn't ask for special recognition, did not demand acknowledgement of their sacrifice. Most returned to civilian life quietly, resuming traditional roles, raising families, working in offices and homes. The war had opened a door, but post-war society largely closed it again. Yet something remained. The knowledge carried by those who served and those who knew them, that women could do more than society assumed. The precedent established in practice that gender was not the determining factor in courage or capability. The memory preserved in photographs and memorials and occasional stories of young women on motorcycles riding through fire. Today, that memory serves as more than nostalgia, more than historical curiosity. It reminds us that courage is not defined by gender, that service takes many forms, that the seemingly ordinary people around us may be capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demand. The dispatch riders of World War II were not fighting for recognition. They were not making political statements. They were not trying to prove anything. They were simply doing what needed to be done, riding through darkness, carrying messages, completing their missions, one delivery at a time, one dangerous journey at a time, one act of courage at a time, building in the aggregate of those individual actions a contribution that helped determine the outcome of the greatest conflict in human history. Their story is worth remembering, not because it is dramatic, though it often was, not because it is inspiring, though it often is, but because it is true, because it happened, because young women climbed onto motorcycles and rode through hell to deliver messages that mattered. And because in the end, that simple truth speaks to something essential about human nature, that when called, people rise, that when tested, people endure, that when needed, people serve. The roar of their engines has faded into history. The roads they rode have been rebuilt, modernized, transformed. The war they served through has passed into memory. But the fact remains, they rode, and in riding, they changed what was possible, not just for themselves, not just for women, but for everyone who came after. That is their legacy. That is their gift to us. The knowledge that courage is not rare, that capability is not limited, that service is not exclusive. The dispatch riders of World War II, the Wrens and ATS women who rode through fire and darkness, carried more than military messages. They carried hope. They carried possibility. They carried the future. One message at a time, one mission at a time, one act of courage at a time, until the war was won, until the darkness lifted, until they could finally gratefully rest.